All right, so now we're back and we've got our nails reading our moisture setting from our soil. And now what I want to do is I want to have this give me a warning that says, hey, add water to this, that I need to add some water to my plants so they don't die. So what we want to do is go back to our code, and so this is the code that we started with just to set up our little moisture sensor. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to introduce this idea of a function, because I don't want my program forever loop to get so complicated, and a function really is nothing more than a little program within a program. So I'm going to go over here to function, and I'm going to make a function, and I'm going to call this function get moisture. Actually, I'm going to change that to get and show moisture. Okay, and that's basically what this function is going to do. So I've got my little function over here that says get and show moisture. Think of this as a little mini program that will run over and over again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything in my current forever loop and I'm going to drag it over to that function. Okay, now this is a function that's going to repeat these three steps over and over again. Now I'm also going to want a function, and let's say make, and I'm going to call this function do something with moisture. Okay, so this is going to be a function that I'm going to add in to enable me to use the data coming from my moisture sensor, which is basically my nails, to do something. And let's say it's to light up my LED display, right, or an LED light. So I'm getting myself an LED light strip, and we're going to need to add from extensions our NeoPixel, because otherwise the microbit won't know that it's there. All right, so that's going to load up. And remember that in our NeoPixel, we're going to need to set a variable strip and put that in the onStart block. And I'm going to plug this one in to pin P1, okay? Because I've got my clip on P0 up here. You know, it shouldn't interfere, but it might. And so that's what I want to do to make sure that we get no interference. And so we're going to change that to 30, okay? Because most of our LED strips will have 30 little light bulbs on them, and that's going to tell microbit you're going to have a strip. It's going to be attached to P1, okay? And we have to remember that it's on P1. Okay, now let's go down here to our do something function. Now, usually when we want to have something happen with our microbit, we're going to want to create a logic statement, because usually we want to have some kind of thinking like, if this happens, do that, or do that if that happens. Okay? So kind of this whole idea of making an if-then or a logic statement. So we've got a logic block. We're going to choose our if true. Okay. So now we've got some decisions to make. Is how are we going to interpret the data coming in from our moisture sensor? Right, it's going to go from a minimum of about 346, you know, that's about what we tested it out as its low value, to 1,000 and 23,024 at the high value. Right, so high value means that it's got plenty of water, right? So we might decide, yeah, you know, that's probably pretty good. Or do we want to say 900 is also pretty good? And part of what we can do is a trial and error and see whether we're keeping our plant moist enough on that certain level. Okay? So we can decide that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this moisture good. All right. And I am going to set that variable in my onStart. I'm going to set that to 800. Okay? And so what I'm going to say is that if my soil moisture reading from my nails is greater than that, water's good. You don't need to water me. If it's below that, yeah, you know, maybe we should give it some water. Okay? So now, down here in my function, do something, I'm going to go back to my logic. I am going to grab a comparison statement, and I'm going to grab my two variables that I want to compare. So I've got moisture good, and I've got my soil reading moisture. Okay. Oops. I do this a fair bit. You have to make sure that you hit that little red dot when you're dragging in your variables. Okay, perfect. Okay, and so now if my soil moisture is greater than my moisture good, again, you're sneaking a little bit of math in there for your students, then what I'm going to want to do is in my NeoPixel, I'm wanting to show my strip color to be, let's say, green. Okay. Now, if it's not, I'm gonna want my strip color to be red. Okay. Oops. All right. Now, let's look at this forever loop. Okay. Now, the forever loop is blank, which means nothing's going to run. This is the nice thing about functions, is that now under my functions block, I've got two blocks. I've got my call, get, and show moisture sensor, and I've got do something. I just drag those two blocks into my forever loop. Okay? And so as I drag those in, what's going to happen is this program is going to run, and the start of the program is going to go through these three blocks. It's going to identify the strip on pin P1, it's going to set a display on pin P2, P16, and then it's going to set a global variable called moisture good to 800. Then it's going to go to my forever loop, and the first thing it's going to do is it's going to call get show moisture. That means it's going to call this block, and it's going to run these three blocks. Then it's going to run do something with moisture, and it will run these. Using functions starts to make programming a little bit easier, because then you can break your program down into different parts, or you can think of this as problem decomposition. It's a key feature of computational thinking. In fact, it's a key feature in lots of STEM education, like mathematics. You tend to want to decompose a problem down into simpler parts, solve those simpler parts, and then put them together for an entire solution. Writing a program is really no different. And why I like using functions is now, instead of having to figure out where I've got an error as my code gets longer, it might be a code in just one function, and now I have to debug something that's a little shorter than something that is really long. And that is our introduction to functions. So now if you download this and you run it, you should be able to have your LED strip either turn red or blue or green or whatever color that you picked it out to be. So let me go down here to my downloads folder. Here we are. And what did I call this? Nail moisture. There we are. So I downloaded it 3 times. So let me go find my microbit. Oops. Alright, where's my little microbit folder? There we are. Alright, let's drag this down into my microbit. It's going to transfer my file. There it goes. My little yellow light is blinking. Okay, so now let's see what my moisture readings is. So it still says I am good. All right. Okay. And now I can test this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unconnect my alligator clips. Alright, so now I'm down to 296. Oh, and I just turned red. Excellent. Alright, so now if I put it back in, and I've got water in my little soil. Let's see if it switches back to 1023, And so there you go. So now I've turned green. So that's how you can create a very simple alarm system using your soil moisture sensor.